You're listening to the Journey Podcast. Most of us spend our days hiding behind masks we put on to protect ourselves. How do we take these masks off and start healing? Find out more in this episode. This episode contains strong language and listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Journey Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. We might not even be aware of it, but we all wear masks at some point in our lives. We usually do this to protect ourselves, and we might get so used to it that the masks become part of who we show to others in certain situations. Today, we talk about why we wear masks to begin with, how we know we are wearing masks, and how we can start taking those masks off. Kim Gross is the founder and creator of the 5-Step Power Pathway. She helps people pleasers and perfectionists who have spent a lifetime of perpetual suffering because they have identified with these patterns. She helps guide clients on a journey of self-healing so that they can have more meaningful connections and have the courage to create the life they desire. As a recovering codependent, she helps people to go from perfectionism and people-pleasing to powerful. She spent a lifetime pleasing and perfecting, and all the while losing herself in the roles that she played. It is her passion and desire to help others to create real and meaningful relationships and create the inner power to dare greatly as they create the life they desire. Kim is the host of the popular podcast Masks Off and is a champion for helping people find out exactly who they are behind the masks they wear. She helps people awaken themselves by guiding them to undo patterns, stop living for others, shift their mindset, and start healing. Let's meet Kim Gross. Hi, Kim. It's so great to have you on the podcast. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because taking off our masks is such a fascinating topic for today's episode. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and let's start a little bit with your story and how you have come to do the work that you do now.
So my podcast is, as you know, called Masks Off. And so the reason that I started to do that podcast is because I have worn so many masks for so much of my life. And in particular, the people pleaser, as well as the perfectionist mask. And I learned at a very young age that if I wanted to feel validated, feel seen, feel heard, feel lovable, feel worthy, that I had to perfect, perform, and please. Thus, the people pleaser and the perfectionist mask were born. Mm-hmm. So then I spent from an early age, just always feeling like I had to please my mom and make my mom happy. And then if I was being a really good girl, my mom would be happy. So I would just want to please her. And then I realized the same with friends. If I want to be liked and I want to be included in a particular group, then I just had to do what was expected of me. So I would wear this mask of pleasing and living according to other people's expectations. So I was people pleasing and then perfecting. When I was 10 years old, I was in the 5th grade. My mom had to go in for a parent-teacher conference. And I remember the teacher saying, I don't remember to this day why I was there, because normally when there's a parent-teacher conference, the student doesn't go. But for some reason, I was at this one, and I remember my teacher saying to my mom that Kim is a pleasure to have in class. She's really, well behaved, AKA she's quiet, she's invisible, she's a people pleaser. But Kim is capable of doing so much more. Right then and there, it was like, aha, like, light bulbs started going off that if I started to apply myself, maybe I would get even more validation. So it's like, okay, this person seems to think I'm capable of more. So I did. I started applying myself, started getting all the papers back and the tests back that said, great job, excellent, so proud of you, star, 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 100. And I would feel every time this like hit, this like adrenaline hit of, oh my goodness, I'm worthy now, I'm valuable. So I just kept perfecting even more straight A's. And then I started with athletics and then playing soccer and softball and getting more and more and more of those accolades and those achievements and feeling like all of my worth as an individual was hinged on those accolades, those achievements, and making other people happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow.
And then it goes on from there.
What a journey. Yeah.
Yes, that's how it started.
Yeah. So you mentioned for yourself about people pleasing and perfectionism. So is that why people generally start wearing masks, or where does that begin? Why do people put on these masks?
Absolutely. And I think that it is true that if we aren't feeling like it's safe to be who we inherently are, we're going to start to put on the masks. And Brene Brown calls it armor. And other people, so mask, the armor to protect ourselves. It's about protection. It's about fear. And Gabor Mate speaks on this a lot. So it's about fear that if I don't stay attached to my loved ones, if I'm not belonging in a herd or in a group, then there's this real sense of being abandoned or rejected. Just like back in the tribal days, if you left the tribe and you went off on your own into the woods, there was a good chance you might get eaten by that mountain lion and not return. So you really wanted to stay together. And we still have that instinct that if I'm all alone and I'm not in my tribe, I might die. So therefore, I'm going to betray my true and authentic self. And I'm going to put on this mask and I'm going to be whoever you want me to be so that you will like me, so that you'll accept me and include me.
I can imagine that if you're not being true to yourself and you are wearing these masks, that has some detrimental effects on your mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being, or even your physical well-being. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Definitely. So when my first was born in 1999, so that was 23 years ago, after he was born, I started to have all kinds of symptoms where I wasn't feeling well. And I would go from one doctor to the next, to the next. And the doctors would say to me, well, of course you're not feeling that well. You just had a baby. Of course you're going to be tired. Of course this. And I'm 31 years old at the time, young. And I felt like I was in the body of a 90-year-old. That's how I felt. And it took me 6 years of going from doctor to doctor to doctor till finally I got a diagnosis that I had Sjogren's syndrome, which is an autoimmune disease. Mm-hmm. And there is family history of autoimmune disease. And I'm almost certain that I also developed and manifested that because I turned on myself. Mm-hmm. Right? You just said there's a physical component, a mental component, a spiritual component. And so all of those parts were suffering because I was not being true to myself. All of those parts were lacking. And it manifested not only in having an autoimmune disease, but I struggled with depression, with anxiety, and I was definitely an overeater for sure, used food to numb, and a codependent. And at the root of people pleasing and perfecting and other masks is codependency.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that is so interesting because I think without even noticing, it happens that we put these masks on automatically depending on the situation we're in. So when we interact with our family, we might wear one mask, and we interact with our friends, we wear another mask, or as a career woman, we wear another mask, and we might not even notice how effortlessly we change these masks, but how profoundly these masks affect us on every level of our being. So that's very, very interesting that you mentioned that. So if we imagine somebody who might be wearing multiple masks in their life, how do we begin the journey of doing the inner work of removing these masks? How do we go about finding ourselves and actually feeling comfortable and strong enough to take off the masks and just live our authentic selves?
That's a great question. And I think first and foremost that it's so important to have support, to get guidance from a coach, a therapist, someone, because doing the inner work is not easy. It is not for everyone. And I can promise you that there will be many people who will go through this lifetime and not do the work. They will never know what it's like to show up fully and authentically. So there's definitely that part of it.
And do you have a specific way or a specific path that you take people down when you're working on removing these masks?
I do. I've created the 5-step power pathway, and there are the 5 steps. So P is for patterns. We cannot change what we do not recognize or what we're not aware of. Dr. Phil used to say all the time, I used to watch Dr. Phil when my kids were little, and he would say all the time that you cannot change what you do not acknowledge. And that's so true. If we don't have an awareness of what is at play, we're not going to change the patterns. If we don't know that we're living out a pattern of people pleasing, perfecting, rescuing, fixing, whatever mask you want to call it. And by the way, wearing a mask is another way of saying that you're living out a pattern, or you're playing out a pattern, or you're playing out a role. So if we're not aware of that, if we're over identifying with the pattern, we think it's just who we are. When I was little, I had no idea that this was a pattern, that this was something that I subconsciously started doing. I just did it out of a way of protection. So it wasn't until later in life, probably around my 30s, that I started to just feel so uncomfortable with those things that I talked about: the depression, the anxiety, the autoimmune, the codependence, my relationships, being with myself, my relationship with myself. They all sucked. I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand how I felt in my own skin. So I wanted and needed to do something. And that's when I started to seek out either Al-Anon meetings or a therapist and so on and so forth. So going back to what I was saying, that the first thing is to have that awareness of the patterns. That's P. And then the next letter is O, is ownership. You have to own your shit. And I'm sorry, I don't know if you're supposed to swear, but you have to own your shit. If you don't own it and you're constantly in this victim role where you're blaming the other, you won't change a thing either. And it doesn't mean that people don't still do shitty things or people aren't mean and nasty. Yes, that is true. But the ownership is, what do you do next? What are you going to do next? Mm-hmm. What is your co-creation? What is your responsibility to changing how you show up in the world? And then the next step is W, which is the willingness to go inward. So I believe that in order to heal, we have to feel. So you have to feel to heal. And it's a process that I take my clients through, where I hold space, I hold a container for them to really go inward and do that work of healing those feelings, that pain that is buried layer upon layer upon layer of sedimentation that's been building since childhood. Mm-hmm. So we have to start to clean that up so that your energy can flow more clearly through. And then the next step is E, which is embracing your inner child and your shadow part. So W and E go together a little bit. And embracing the shadow parts is really just not cutting off the parts of ourselves that we dislike, the part of me that was overweight, the part of me that overeats. Like, I just stop, Kim, stop. And every time I would get mad or have that critical inner voice saying, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? Number one, I was just repeating the voice of my mom. And number two, how is that helping me? It's just saying I'm disowning that part and I'm not fully integrated. And we can't show up fully in the world until we are fully integrated in our wholeness. And then the last step is R, is radical responsibility, is where I teach people then what steps or actions can you take next. So it's about setting boundaries, having conscious communication, setting up daily habits. That's where the action takes place. So it's about bringing together the feminine and the masculine. And that's where we take the action steps in the R.
Oh, I love the framework that you have created for this process. I find that so interesting. You really do take people through the process of looking at the inside and doing the healing work so that this can be a permanent change that they make, not just something that they look at once and then forget about. So, wow, that's some great work. And what do you find once you take people through this program of yours, or even when you did the work yourself? What does that open up for you? What is the impact of that?
So first of all, I just want to say that it's always a process, right? So I still use the 5-step power pathway every day on myself because things will still come up. Life happens, the patterns, the masks will want to come back in. And then it's about being able to just go back in and do this process over and over because we still can get triggered. Now, I will say that today, I do not get triggered in the way that I did a year ago, 5 years ago, and 10 years ago, for sure, because certain things do heal within us. And then like that energy is just released and it no longer triggers you in the same way. So what's possible with that is freedom, right? Now it's like, I just talked about the sedimentation, the layers. So if we were to visualize water and you were to visualize a real stagnant marsh that's murky and muddy and all kinds of in it, and then you start to clear it. Now think about that being our energy, and you start to heal and you start to clean and clear, and then the energy starts flowing more like a clean flowing river where the water is going clear now and it's moving, and there still might be rocks or boulders in that river, but the water can kind of go around it a little bit, or it maybe goes over it. So what's possible is this freedom, I feel like a veil has been lifted and I can see things more clearly. If I were to look outside and look at the sky, it's really blue and the trees are really green, versus before this work, I couldn't see it in the same way because I was so in my head and in my thoughts, and I wasn't in the present moment. I was in the past and I was in the future. So what's possible is learning how to live more in the present moment. And when you live in the moment and you're coming from wholeness and fullness, there's more spontaneous joy. There's more peace. There's more love. Your relationships change. Like, that's one of the big things, is that people pleasers have really unfulfilling relationships because they're always pleasing and they're not being true to themselves. Now, if you start to heal from that people pleasing pattern, now you have the ability to set boundaries in your relationship, have different communication, and have more meaningful connections. And then having more courage to step outside your comfort zone and really create the life that you want to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow. Sounds like you open up so much healing for yourself as well, right? And it can impact your mental health, your physical health, everything that comes with that. And I'm curious, how do you know that you're wearing a mask? Because you said that at some point it became almost like a part of you that you were living with this mask on. So, how can people tell if they're wearing masks?
So for the perfectionist, well, first of all, on my website, I have a people pleaser and perfectionist quiz. So do you want to know if you're a people pleaser? Do you want to know if you're a perfectionist? You can take my quiz, and then that will clue you in if you're wearing either of those masks. But I would say that if you are feeling like you're not happy, if you're not feeling like you're being your true self, if you feel like there's this low grade of maybe depression or anxiety, and you're just not living your life the way you want to live your life, that might be an indicator that something is off and that you might be living out a pattern rather than living your life. You might be addicted. You might be numbing your pain. You might have awful relationships. Maybe your relationships are unfulfilling. Maybe you play really small in the world and you're afraid to step outside your comfort zone, or you're living in fear all the time and you don't know why. These would be considered different symptoms or signals that something underneath is going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's about going underneath. So I don't think people are going to say, unless they take the quiz or they listen to my podcast, and I talk about so many different masks, because I wear the rescuer mask. I have to fix it for my kids. I had to rescue my mom, my dad, the caretaker. And then there's the mask of masculinity for men. If men are feeling like they have to be macho and they have to be super successful and the provider, they're wearing this mask of masculinity. So there are characteristics that go along with each of the masks, and it probably would take too long to outline them all right now, right here. But I would say that if you, as I mentioned, have any of those feelings underneath, or those behaviors of anxiety and depression and numbing and just not feeling connected to yourself or to others, those would all be really good indicators that something is going on underneath.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I'm kind of feeling like many of us can identify with that. And at different times, maybe even during the day and during our lives, we put on these masks and they might become just so common that we don't even notice that we're doing that. Mm. And do you want to go over some of the programs and services that you offer so that listeners can get an idea of how they could connect with you if they'd like to work with you?
Absolutely. So I mentioned the 5-step power pathway, and that is my offering right now. And I do that through individual coaching. So I take clients through the 5-step power pathway through 12 sessions. It's one-on-one. I do it through Zoom. And I have had people go through it and really had amazing transformations and changes in not only relationships with others, but their relationship with themselves. And they're so really aware of when they're people like, oh, they'll call me and say, oh, I was just did this and there's my people pleaser, or there's my perfectionist. And so they're really aware of it right now. And then they've gone through the program. So they have the tools to be able to implement, to make the changes. So that's what I offer, is my 5-step power pathway. And as I mentioned, I do have that people pleaser perfectionist quiz that's right on my website. And it's kimgrosscoaching.com. So if they go to that, they'll be able to click on the quiz, take the quiz, and even have my Calendly link and book a call if they would like to.
Amazing. And as Kim mentioned, she also has her own podcast called Masks Off. And you can listen in from your favorite podcast provider to that. And we will be linking to all of Kim's offerings in the show notes as well. So be sure to check there for ways that you can connect with her. And this has been another incredible episode. And I really hope our listeners have enjoyed the journey into taking off our masks as much as I have. It has been fantastic chatting with you today, Kim. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me. I really did enjoy this conversation.
Yeah, it was a pleasure and such a unique topic that we haven't talked about before on the podcast. So I really appreciate you coming on today and speaking with me. Thank you.
You are so welcome.
Take care, Kim. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Journey podcast, please subscribe, share on social media, and leave us a review. And be sure to get your copy of our brand new ebook called Break Free. Sending you love and courage, and see you next week. Until then, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and the Journey blog.